Do you see the just one big thing, or do you see like a bunch of little stuff?
One big.
Okay. Did you see the slide change?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so remember that the point, I'm just going to kind of review some of the stuff we went through yesterday. The purpose of the study of ethics for Aristotle is not, as it is in the other inquiries, the attainment of theoretical knowledge. We are not conducting this inquiry in order to know what virtue is, but in order to become good. Else there would be no advantage in studying it. So I made this big point yesterday about the point of studying ethics for Aristotle is not merely to understand what virtue is, but rather to become a virtuous person. So we have to reorient our purpose in our study in order to make sure that we're getting it. Okay. 2.1, we talked about this yesterday. We become just by doing just actions. So that's another big principle for Aristotle. You become just by doing just actions. Habits, actions lead to habits, habits lead to character. And that's for virtues and vices. So vices are also habits that we form by acting in particular ways. Hence, it is no small matter whether one habit or another is inculcated in us from an early childhood. On the contrary, it makes a considerable difference, or rather, all the difference. Okay, so you are what you do, basically, for Aristotle. You are what you do. Now, what I want you guys to think about real quick, if you have your notebooks, I want you to write down this question. Do you have control So I'll write in the chat too. So do you have control? Whoa, take it easy. Do you have control over who you become? Okay. Do you have control over who you become? Now, what I want everyone to do in the chat real quick is, with a sentence, I want you to tell me how Aristotle's ideas right here, just right here, lead him to say yes to that question. Okay, and I don't want you to submit your answer yet. I'm going to have us submit it when I say submit it. So just write it out in the chat. I just want like a sentence. Okay, so write it out in the chat, but don't hit submit yet, on how Aristotle's view in chapter 1 enables him to say yes to this question in the chat. All right. So I want everyone to submit in 3, 2, 1, submit. Okay, great, excellent. All right. We develop habits to our own will, allowing us to become the person we want to be. We can also act according to the virtues we want to cultivate. Okay, very good. Joseph's answer is pretty much right on there. If he thinks that tiny habits that you don't can affect you so much, then at least by controlling. Yeah, it's very good, Karis, also true. Good point there. Since we learn by doing, it is in our control to do, which means we have control over what we become. Yeah, it's the learn by doing is going to be interesting when we get to thinking about the emotions and feeling pleasure in the right way. You are what you do according to your own rationality, you're responsible for your actions, therefore you have control of who you become. Okay. Characteristic and lifestyle is essential in forming who we become. To develop these aspects, you must form habits of your doing. Okay, good. Is who he is and the habits you build. Okay. Yeah, so you want to think about you have control over your character through your actions. Okay. This is actually a very interesting idea. Some people say no, right? You don't have control over who you become. You're just stuck. It's all fated. Your environment, your whatever, you just are what you are, sucks. But Aristotle claims that this isn't always the case. So Derek, Joseph, make sure you're paying attention. I don't know what tomfoolery is happening. Okay. Focus here. All right. Okay. So yeah, this is a very interesting idea, I think, because normally we don't always get that answer. So it's a huge human question. Haley, I also need camera on, so I know that you're here. Okay, so we talked about this in 2.2. Basically, the idea that proportion, the right amount at the right time, is what makes something healthy or good, and that applies to the virtues as well. Virtues are mean between extremes, so on, so on, so on. Okay, that's what we talked about last time. Okay. 2.3, this is very, very, very crucial. Okay, so make sure you're catching this. Virtues include our emotions and pleasures. They're not just right actions. They're not just doing the right thing. Okay. Virtue requires that you feel the right way and the right amount of pleasure towards the right things. Okay. It is not unimportant for our actions this is bullet 4, whether we feel joy and pain in the right or wrong way. Okay. And the last, I want you to just think about this last one. Every study, both of virtue and of politics must deal with pleasures and pains, for if a man has the right attitude toward them, he will be good. If the wrong attitude, he will be bad. So think about this. If I don't feel pleasure towards helping the poor, doing the dishes, am I a bad person? That seems weird. What do you think? What do you think he's trying to say here? Anyone want to try to take a shot?
Mrs. Sommer, can you say the analogy again?
I just read the last bullet and said, so if I don't feel pleasure towards helping the poor, doing good things, I'll be bad eventually.
It kind of sounds like that's what he's suggesting in this.
Right. So you might think that sounds crazy. Who thinks that sounds crazy? Sort of. Who wants to try to defend it and say, actually, it's not that crazy when you think about what he's trying to say? Phoebe, let's see you flip the other side and do this is like paradigmatically open-mindedness when you can do this. So let's see how you do. Try to think about it from like, try to make it sound not crazy real quick.
I guess it depends if you like really emphasize on genuinity and like the intention behind your actions. So if you have the wrong intention or like the wrong like heart and you're doing it forcefully, it's not really genuine. And in that way, what you're doing isn't really good because it isn't for the right reasons why you're doing it yourself.
Yeah, so you went intention route. So this is very interesting. So you have to pay attention to this because this is crucial for his understanding of ethics. It's not simply, and I'm going to connect off of Phoebe's point, it's not simply that you do the right action. Aristotle thinks that's not enough for you to become a good man. Anybody can get lucky and just do good actions. Anyone can just do that. In fact, you could even do something that seems good and hate doing it. Another thing that Aristotle's saying, this is why I think you guys will understand this, is that eventually pleasure will win out. So focus on this point. Aristotle takes pleasure so seriously that he thinks that you have to form it the right way. If you just think that doesn't matter, you can just grit your teeth, you won't win. That's not going to work. Eventually, your desire for pleasure will win out. And a good man, a full rich, flourishing man, not only does the good, but loves the good. This is Plato's whole point, right? In the point of education, it's to help us love what is beautiful, or even feel pleasure towards what is beautiful, what is good, what is true. And Aristotle thinks that if a person does not yet feel pleasure towards the right things, he is not yet virtuous. He's on his way, possibly. Later on, we'll have a distinction, but he's not fully there yet. But modern ethics, so a guy named Kant thought all that mattered was simply doing the right action. He thought, here's a fun question. He thought that the harder it was to do, like the least amount of pleasure you got from it, the more moral it was. It required more virtue to do something that you didn't want to do, but was good, than if you wanted to do it and was good. He thought a more virtuous person would suffer, like the person, mom tells you to do the dishes and you say inside, you're like, I don't want to do it. I'm going to hate this, but you know what? It's good. I'm going to do it. I'm going to grit my teeth. I'm just going to do it. Kant says that person's ethical. That person's going the right way. But if the person says, man, I love obeying my mom. This is Aristotle's person. I love obeying my mom. I love doing that. It's a good thing. I'm going to go do those dishes. Kant actually says that's not a virtuous person because they're being motivated by pleasure, namely pleasing their mom. Whereas Aristotle says, no, that's a part of being a virtuous person, is that you actually love doing the good and that you have pleasure doing it. So what do you guys think? Who's right, Kant or Aristotle?
Hey, Mr. Summer.
Yeah.
So you know how what was it? Aristotle's like, you not only have to do the good, but you also have to love it. But the thing is, like, the way we love it is like kind of based on like how we were brought up, or like that's like a significant part.
Right. Or
Well, like, what
yeah,
about like, huh?
go ahead.
Oh, well, like, but in mere Christianity, I remember Lewis talking about charity
Mhm.
and how, what was it like? You might not like want to help the other person, but like the more you do it, like eventually you'll start to kind of develop like a passion for them or like a love for them.
That's kind of Aristotle's view. So you fake it till you make it, right? So you
Yeah.
act towards, even if you don't like it, for the sake of developing pleasure and pains towards the right things, as well as other stuff. Pleasure is just one component of a virtue. It's not all of it. Because you could feel pleasure towards doing the good and still not do it. And Aristotle says that person's not virtuous either. So it's not just that you feel the right way, it's that you do the right thing, all these things. But yeah, so Lewis would kind of agree, or with Aristotle here, and Aristotle would kind of agree with that. Yeah. That's the process of becoming virtuous. Yeah. Is the initial dislike or unfamiliarity an exception to this argument? Joy, do you want to unpack that?
Because I thought in the beginning, like we start trying to be virtuous by doing the action first.
Mhm.
So like I'm assuming that the pleasure aspect isn't gonna be there immediately. So is that okay?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's all about becoming. So for Aristotle, happiness is an activity. It's a life in conformity, right? So it's not just a one-time thing. Aristotle's concerned to talk about a whole life. Okay, so this is also why for him, children, we never start with a blank slate either. Okay, so as soon as you're born, people are trying to get you to feel the right way and do the right things. Okay, does anyone have any family with like young children, like 2, 3, 4 right now? Yeah, just watch how the parents interact with the kids. No, don't do that. No, or they'll get angry and they'll say, no, we don't get angry. That's not how we, right? Or they'll scream. I'll say, no, that's not, or they'll yell at them, right? But what's happening there is the parents from a young age are trying to get the child to do the right thing and to feel the right way. So we to use a word that Heidegger brings up is that we're kind of thrown into the world, but not only are we thrown into the world, we're formed as a result of that. We never just start. Okay, so you have all this stuff going in the background when you do any action about how to feel, how to think about it. Okay. So yeah, I don't think we're just blank, but that initial dislike is maybe the process for you to figure out what's the mean. And we're going to get to that later, that question about how do we know later on, but it just may be that we're not virtuous. Right. Yeah. And that's a realization. So sometimes it may be that this is a part of the self-knowledge stuff, is when I realize for the first time that I don't feel pleasure towards it, it may be an indication to me that I'm not actually as virtuous as I thought. Okay. So virtue, this is why later on he'll say, this is why it's very hard for anyone to be good, is because virtues require this gnarly dynamic. Whereas most people could do the right thing if they just grit their teeth, but Aristotle says that's not enough. We have to love it. I don't know. Okay. Any last thoughts here before we bounce? Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay. So this is chapter 4. Okay, so this is virtuous action and virtue. this is where he starts giving these criterias, right? This is just going to come out from the last chapter. So someone has virtue or doing a virtuous action. If he knows what he's doing, he chooses to act the way he does, and he must choose it for its own sake. And that action must spring from his unchangeable character. He goes on to say, the first condition is not as important, whereas the other two conditions are all decisive, since repeated act of justice and self-control result in the possession of these virtues. Okay. I'll wait till we get to the third condition. The third condition is going to start to answer how we know that we're doing a virtuous action. So that he must know what he's doing. It's not this, what this condition is supposed to do is it's supposed to help it make it such that it's not lucky. The guy just doesn't, give money and whatever. He knows what he's doing. He's aware of it. But as Aristotle says, the bottom two are more important. Okay. He must do the virtuous action because he realizes the virtuous action is good on its own. Okay. He's not doing it for the consequences. This is why Aristotle's not a utilitarian. He's not doing it because it will, we'll just stick to consequences. Okay. So the virtuous man, according to Aristotle, usually would not kill someone to save a bunch of people, because to kill someone usually is going to be wrong for just on its own. Okay. So there's a huge divide between virtue ethics people and utilitarians on this point. Because Aristotle thinks that to be virtuous, you must choose it for its own sake. You must recognize that it's good to do for its own sake. Okay. Because it brings pleasure and it does all this stuff on its own. The third condition is that it must spring from his character. This is saying that if a man is to be patient, it can't just be that he does it one time, 2 times, 3 times. It must be ingrained into his person. Okay. This is why he says this other two conditions, conditions 2 and 3, are vital, because it's through repeated actions, repeated just acts, repeated temperate acts or self-control that result in the unchangeable character. Okay. All right. So those two conditions, what are some thoughts here? I want to hear some vocal questions, responses to this.
Mr. Sommer,
Yeah.
when he says doing the action like for its own sake,
Mhm.
is he saying doing it for the actual virtue, or like how it's gonna affect the other person, like basically the result of the virtue?
Okay, if you're thinking where I'm thinking you're thinking, this is very important. If you're not, then we'll get there through a series of questions. Unpack more of what you're saying. This is actually very crucial. This will be an issue possibly if I think you're going where you're going. So unpack what you're saying a little bit more. Yeah.
Like doing like virtue for the sake of like just doing that virtue, or doing it for what will come out of that virtue.
Okay, you used the word earlier, how it will affect others. So what I want you to do is try to unpack what the issue might be. Like what's a worry that you have in saying it like this either or. What's the worry?
Oh, wait, I had it. It's like doesn't it go back to the intention thing?
It's not, the intention is a part of the virtuous characteristic. So, which we're going to get to in the next chapter. It's this complex organization of emotions, pleasures, intelligence, everything, intentions, which gets to the intelligence part. But it's definitely done for its own sake, because you think being in that state, just think about it like this. Why are virtues valuable? Well, because it's almost this perfect state where you feel the right way, you think the right way, you act the right way, you are the right way, so to speak. You're completely, to use Platonic language, harmonized. So why do I want virtue? Because I want to be in that state. I want to be acting out of that state all the time. That would be valuable. Like that's like activity out of that is happiness, right? So happiness is a life in conformity with virtue. Okay. So you might, like Aristotle thinks, I want that. I'm choosing that for its own sake. I'm not doing it because I want to help the person. Okay, now here's the issue. Okay. I'm doing it because I want to be virtuous, because of the pleasures and the fullness that virtue brings. I want that for my own sake. What's the worry with that?
That sounds very contradictory to what he's trying to argue.
Okay, be specific there. What's contradictory about it? And you
He's
probably want to use the word inconsistent. Contradictory is too strong. But yeah.
being inconsistent because wasn't he saying that like
Everyone pay attention to this dialogue real quick. This is very important because this is going to raise a issue for his view. Okay, so pay attention to this. Good.
you can't like act virtue for like your own sake out of pleasure? You have to do it to kind of.
Well, it's not just for the sake of pleasure. It's all encompassing. So if I have virtue, I have all these other things, right? So the reason why I want virtue is because it just doesn't include pleasure. It includes all these other things too, right? Right intelligence. But think about it like this. What's the motivation for me helping Granny across the street?
According to Aristotle, it would be like to act out of that or no, for that virtue and kind of.
I want to help Granny because it's going to help me become virtuous, and I want virtue for its own sake. But what's the issue with this?
You're fulfilling a pleasure.
Okay, does anyone else want to try to make a stab? What's the issue? Like if I say, imagine I said, so you asked me, Mr. Sommer, why did you help the granny across the street? And I tell you, because I want to be virtuous. And happiness is a life in conformity of virtue. I want to be happy. What, like if someone heard that with modern ears, what would they immediately say? That sounds selfish. Yeah. That sounds egotistical. So I'm not being good for others' sake. I'm being good for my sake. Ugh. You might think that's not great. Does everyone get that worry? If not, you should ask some questions here if you don't quite get the worry. Okay. You definitely want to write that down somewhere. How does Aristotle's ethics avoid this type of egoism? Like how is it supposed to include the concern for others? Because you might think being a good man includes doing actions for the sake of others. And when I help Granny cross the street, this may be a push on Aristotle's view. I don't do it because I want to be virtuous. I do it because I just want to, I see the need. Granny needs help. So that might be an issue with this view. It can't quite deal with others in the right way. Okay. All right. So the third condition is important here because it tells us, how do we know? This is another big issue with Aristotle's ethics that some people don't like, is this quote right here. How do you know when you're acting virtuously? Everyone you've asked that question. How do I know? How do I know when I've found the mean? How do I know when I've acted virtuously? Well, Aristotle thinks acts are called just and self-controlled when they are the kind of acts which a just and self-controlled man would perform. So, how do you know what virtuous actions are? Karis, how do you know what acts are just or not?
I'm not sure if I'm right, but is he saying like when you think that they are?
Not when you think that they are. Think about the quote one more time.
Or like when you think that's what a just man would be doing?
Right. What do you think about this?
Isn't that kind of subjective?
It is. Well, explain a little bit more of what you mean.
Because not everyone's gonna have the same view on whether that's a just action or that's what a just man is.
And why is that a worry?
I don't know, if you're gonna be like extreme, you could say that a serial killer believes that a just man would kill everyone. But not everyone thinks that.
In your kind of common sense way of thinking about it, do you think there's some truth to this though?
Yeah, I think like, I don't know, maybe everybody has like a certain base foundation morally for being human. So I guess it kind of makes sense, but it's not really specific.
Right. This is really interesting. Pay attention, everyone, to this next question I'm going to ask Karis. Karis, what does this reveal, according to Aristotle, about the role of examples in the moral life?
Wait, what do you mean by examples?
So whenever you ask what is a just man and temperate man, people are going to start to think of examples, right? So how is that going to affect their moral life?
Maybe that the people around them or their experiences affect like cultural, like cultural relativism or whatever. Every culture's morals are a little bit different from each other.
And that's going to affect
The view that people have on morality.
Well, the goal, right?
Yeah.
So justice is always going to be practiced, right, in our environment, in our society, and throughout history. So we always are going to be looking for these examples, either our dad, our mom, Hercules, any of these things. This is fascinating because what Aristotle is saying is that the way that we really know what acts are just or not, or temperate, are by the examples that we have in our minds. And not just any example, the example where we say, this is what the just man would do, okay? All right, so that's one way of approaching it, namely looking at examples, okay? And it's from those examples that we find out what the virtue is, and that affects our end goal, okay? Another way to interpret this is to say the following. It's not so much from the examples that we see from history or literature, although that's true. It's more of an ideal that we have in our own mind where we say, that's not what a just man would do. Or that's not what a temperate man would do. So it's more like hypothetical. What would what would Jesus do? Or what would a just man do in this situation? That's what I should do. So what's fascinating about this is there's actually, in our moral experience, we do this a lot. Jesus wouldn't act like this. That's where we're doing the bottom. Thus, or what would Jesus do? Okay, that tells me what justice would be here. Or how would Mr. Sommer act in this situation? Okay, I have to do the opposite because he's like the worst example, so that's another way, like act opposite of the most vicious person. Okay, so I'll do the opposite of what they would do. Or we think a just man would not sit by. I just watched a trailer last night of a movie where this kid it's done in the 60s. This kid is seeing one of his friends who was Black being just made fun of and threatened, and the old man told the son, a just man does not sit idly by and allow that to happen. Next time you see that happen, you stand up for your friend. But notice what he just did right there. He says a just man would not stand by. Okay, that's the same type of thing. How does the little boy know what justice is? Well, the grandpa tells him that's not what a just man would do. So this is actually a third option. Your superiors, your parents, people forming you, tell you what just men do. And thus you act in accordance with that, because that strikes you like, yeah, that is what a just man would do. Okay, so there's three modes here. This is, like I said, this is actually kind of deep. Either we know what justice is through the examples of our society, history, literature, what our society says is good. The second route is we idealize and we hypothetical, like that's not what a just man would do. And the third one is we are told explicitly by our superiors what justice is, what the just man would do in a situation. Okay, so how do we know what justice is? Well, our society, the things that we read, the examples we pull, our parents or people forming us, and our own idealized version. I'll say one more thing here. These aren't mutually exclusive. Okay, and what's important for all of this is the way in which that connects to condition 2 is very interesting. This is a part of internalization. You start to internalize what justice is and what courage is and what temperance is through this process of enculturation. Okay, your society, your parents, yourself, we're being formed all the time. The stuff that we're watching, the stuff that what's like, what temperance looks like. Some people are saying temperance includes sex outside of marriage. Some people are saying temperance doesn't. Some are saying drugs is consistent with temperance. Some are saying alcohol is. So just realize that all the time, our views about what these virtues include will be affected by the culture that we're adopting from those around us. Okay. And once again, I think that's just something that seems right. Hence why your upbringing is very important for Aristotle. Okay. In connection to Paul, so in Ephesians 6:4, Paul makes the statement, St. Paul makes the statement, raise up your children in the paideia, that's the Greek word that's used, of the Lord, meaning like this full enculturation process. Raise your child up in the paideia of the Lord. And what's interesting is Paul and Aristotle seem to agree that the foundation of our education affects our lives and who we become. Because our foundation provides the guidelines and the end goals of the virtues, principles, and things we live by, and that inevitably affects our actions, which affects our character inevitably, right? So you may think that this means that actually we're not in control of who we become. So, but that's a fun thing. But anyways, okay, so I just rambled a lot there. Well, I didn't ramble. It was intelligent and it was intentional. Okay, so I didn't ramble. We're going places. Okay, but does we also came back full circle. So la-di-da. Do we have any questions or things here? Okay, just since it's 9:29, so I don't leave you just with this confusion on that last point. They are mutually consistent. Okay, so Aristotle thinks that although we ultimately still have the primary role in determining who we become, but we can't deny that our foundation does affect us. But we're not slaves to that, because that would mean we wouldn't have any real free will. And in book 3, Aristotle tries really, really hard to show that virtue requires intentional choice done by an agent, done by us, right? And I would also say this first condition is also very important here, because the agent must know what he is doing, and he must choose it for its own sake. Okay, so even if you're raised in poor fashion, it might really negatively affect you. But at the end of the day, a person must choose the good that they're doing for its own sake as a result of their own knowledge, and that knowledge must spring from the character that they have sought to implement. Okay, so all of your parents have told you how to live, how to act, how to feel, but it's ultimately up to you to do the hard work of implementing that consistently, little actions, big actions, over a lifetime, to become happy or achieve a life in conformity with virtue. So, are we responsible for who we become? Yes, but it's complicated. And that's good, because our life's a little complicated. And we want the view to track with the complicated stuff. Otherwise, it feels like it's just cheap and not right. Okay. All right. So sweet. Let's see. Tomorrow we're probably going to Zoom again. I don't know how it's going to turn out, if everyone's still going to feel like death tomorrow. We'll see. Most likely that will happen. Just stay posted for Google Classroom. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. Well, go and become who you should become. All right. I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yep.
you.